So welcome everyone. I'm Greg Stamnes, co-chair of the ASPRS Early Career Professional Council, or ECPC for short. We are here today to talk about the importance of leadership for the early career professional. We also have with us Youssef. Youssef, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Youssef. I'm the chair of ECPC, and I want to here mention that if you're interested to be part of ECPC leadership, you're more than welcome. Just send us an email. If you attend 4 of these meetings, we will have you as ECPC ambassador, and we'll put your photo and bio on our ECPC microsite in ASPRS. And the opportunity that we are offering here is the ASPRS mentorship. We have the ASPRS Mentors podcast on YouTube. If you watch all of these sessions, this is a great way to allow you to break the ice and go and have some personal, or I would say more better way of introducing yourself to all these successful professionals when you see them in G Week. And I want to remind you, G Week usually happens in February, and it's happening in February 2024. We can give you more details about the dates. What we are trying to do is to bring all the guest speakers into one room, and we will share with you the dates of this and the dates and the location within G Week. And we look forward to seeing every one of you there, where you can have, ask those guest speakers specific questions and meet them in person. Thank you, Greg.
Thanks, Youssef. This week we have with us, our guest is Sean Tucker. Sean, are you okay with us recording and sharing on social media?
Yes.
Okay, I guess to start off, can you please introduce yourself and provide an overview of your background and qualifications?
Yeah, thanks for the invitation to be here today. It's a pleasure. So I've orientated the talk around the emergent leader, the novice leader, and looking forward to that conversation. So I have a faculty position both at the University of Regina in Saskatchewan, Canada, and also a position at the University of British Columbia part-time. And in both roles, I teach leadership classes. And I have done so at the University of Regina since 2010. I also conduct research on leadership, and also involved in the practice of leadership through various roles. And one of the books before I forget, one of the books that I wanted to recommend to people, there's lots of leadership books on Amazon. The one that I use in my graduate program is Peter Northhouse's Leadership Theory and Practice. It's up to its 9th edition now. I think the most widely sold leadership textbook on Amazon, and it's a very accessible read, and it discusses a number of theories out there. So it's great to be here. I've probably taught over 1,000 students that would be in that emergent to mid-career point, and I've done a little bit of leadership coaching as well.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the recommendation. I heard a stat that there's 1,000 leadership books, or over 1,000 leadership books published every year, or something like that.
Yeah, there's a lot out there for sure.
It's good to narrow it down. I guess to start, do you want to discuss what is leadership, and are they born or are they developed over time?
Yeah, that's a great place to start. And so, at a high level, we can define leadership in terms of a role. Are you a supervisor, a team lead, manager, director, senior director, VP, president, CEO, etc. So that's one way to think about leadership. You're in a leadership position, but I think most of us have had the experience where we've seen somebody in a leadership position who's not exercising leadership. And so what is leadership? Well, what we often describe it in terms of a process of leadership, and in terms of certain behaviors. that's kind of what we're zoning in on. And so there are many definitions of leadership. One study cited over 200 definitions of leadership. But, for the purposes of today, I think we want to think about behaviors that motivate, that influence people towards a common goal. And there's also the ethical component of that. They do it in an ethical way, and the goal is an ethical goal. I want to acknowledge, though, that there's no consensus around that definition. So some people may have heard of servant leadership, the idea that you kind of lead from behind and support people. Might look a bit different what the definition of leadership is from that perspective. And you asked about the nature versus nurture question. And fortunately, in the last 20 years, we've had some good research come out about the role of genetics and socialization in leadership emergence. I won't go into great detail. You can look this up on YouTube, but there's twin studies. If you're unfamiliar with them, look at samples of identical twins and non-identical twins to kind of tease out the relative contribution of genetic makeup and socialization to various outcomes. So one outcome they've looked at is how high you rise in an organization. They call it the technical term a leader role occupancy. And they found that genetics explains about 30% of the variance in how high you would rise in an organization. In terms of leadership process theories, one popular one would be transformational leadership, which is an inspiring, ethical-based leadership. There's some research evidence to suggest that about 50% of the variance in that form of leadership is explained by genetics, and therefore the other half is explained by one's own life experiences. So we know that. We also know from research studies that have examined the effectiveness of leadership training interventions, and we have some pretty robust studies where we've random assignments to supervisors to a leadership training intervention and some in a control group. And what they found is that there's some support for the efficacy of those leadership training interventions on a variety of outcomes, leadership behaviors, but also safety outcomes, for example, in teams. So yes, some people have a head start, and we might look at some people's natural leaders, and that can be true. But we also know that our life experiences or opportunities and those training opportunities also play a role as well. And we talk about life experiences, sports team, other community groups, serving on a board of directors, all sorts of your parents, grandparents, friends, teachers, they all shape who we are and our leadership over time. Great.
I guess switching gears to talking about authenticity, which is a topic that comes up a lot regarding leadership. So it's often emphasized in leadership discussions. And how can early career professionals or geospatial professionals maintain authenticity while assuming leadership roles, especially if they're concerned about imposter syndrome? Are there any practical strategies for being an authentic leader?
Yeah, there's a lot there. And, I'm just thinking, we're on to the second set of questions here, and we could spend a lot of time kind of a deep dive talking about these. I mean, the word authenticity is often heard today. It's a very popular word. And, in response to, I'll say inauthentic leadership in organizations, we had a movement towards authentic leadership. And so, in about the last 15, 20 years, we've really seen a lot of interest in this concept of authentic leadership. It's discussed in Northhouse book, There's no shortage of articles in Harvard Business Review. That's another great source for looking at leadership writing and research, very accessible. So that there's been discussion there as well. I think there's still discussion about what authenticity means. We're talking about being your genuine self. And so, each of us are unique in our own way. So I think we need to keep that in mind. What I would recommend for a novice or emerging leader is to read a Harvard Business Review article. And I think it's from around 2016-17. It's called The Authenticity Paradox. And it's by Dr. Regina, and it's in Harvard Business Review. And Ibarra talks about, on one hand, this need to really stay grounded and balance our authentic self with the demands of our organizational reality, and being adaptable and finding that right balance. The most conceptualization of authentic leadership will acknowledge that we are changing over the life course. Who we were 10 years ago is in many cases different from where we are today now, but there is a core of the self that stays steady. Our values are pretty constant. But the Ibarra article, I think, is a good read in terms of how adaptable and reflection, a useful piece for reflecting on who we are and how adaptable we're able to be to situations. And thanks for posting that, Greg. So we do grow as leaders, and I think our self-concept, it can change over time. And that's fair. So, to your question about imposter syndrome and, a popular saying of fake it until you make it, I think this is, as you're growing as a leader and getting exposed to new experiences, you will be expected to, lead in appropriate ways for the setting. And that may be uncomfortable when it's not aligned to how you define your authentic self. And so that can leave some discomfort. In leadership training studies, there have been comments from participants afterwards, like, it felt inauthentic for me to do this. I've been taught how to be a more charismatic leader, for example. That felt inauthentic. But what I would propose is that the leaders who we look up to in our organization or in popular culture and leadership positions, that there is preparation going into critical leadership moments and how we're going to act, say, and what we say in those moments as well. And it's really about your followers and your audience and leading in an appropriate way. So I guess the last thought in terms of practical strategies, yeah, you will find yourself in situations where you may feel like a bit of an imposter. I would say that always behave in a manner that's consistent with your values first and foremost. I wouldn't compromise those. But there's other ways that we adapt and grow over time, and it may feel uncomfortable to adapt and change over time in those ways. But you want to think about, is this helping me be a better leader and motivate and inspire people? And if it is, and you're not compromising your core values, then I think it's worth trying and learning and growing.
You mentioned charisma there. I'm just going to share my screen so that the YouTubers can see the article while I ask this next question. Should work. So you mentioned charisma. It's often seen as an essential trait for effective leadership. How can geospatial professionals develop and harness charisma in their leadership roles? And is it always necessary for successful leadership?
Yeah, that's a great question. The charisma, and that's often comes up in discussion of leadership. And so I guess I'd like to start with defining what we mean by charisma, and something more than we know it when we see it. Because many people might describe it in terms of an aura that somebody has, but that's not really kind of helping us understand what charisma is. Or we might define it as like, I have an emotional reaction. I feel like pulled in to this person and what they're saying. And that's defining charisma in terms of its outcome. And so we know when we see it, we know the impact it can have on our audience. And it's often that emotional connection, right? That inspiration we get from somebody who's charismatic. And they bring people in. So researchers have studied charismatic leadership. They've looked at, ethical charismatic leadership, and then kind of more of an amoral type charismatic leadership. So I want to differentiate between those two. And what some leadership scholars have looked at is so-called charismatic leadership tactics. That's a mouthful. But you can just search that online. There's, I don't know if Harvard Business Review has an article, but you'll find accessible articles on charismatic leadership tactics. And these are things like facial expressions, using gestures, using your hands, projecting your voice, storytelling, metaphors. These are things that charismatic leaders do to bring people in, to evoke an emotional kind of connection with an audience. And there's some evidence that these can be learned, at least in the short term. There's a great article, and I think you'd find it by Googling charismatic leadership tactics, and it involved a couple of groups of MBA students, and they were asked to give a speech about an organization in crisis. And the speech was recorded, and they actually show in the articles pictures of people, and they're kind of just sort of standing there like this. They're not using their hands, so not very charismatic. And then they provide them with training on charismatic leadership behaviors. They show them their video, they have them practice, and they give the speech again after the training, and they're recorded. And they had coders go through and watch the pre-post training and look at the charismatic leadership tactics. And lo and behold, people are much more animated and more compelling after this training. So I think at the later on, we're going to talk a little bit about Toastmasters and opportunities to develop leadership. But, I think it does take emotional energy. It takes emotional labor for sure to if we're an introvert, to step out and try some of these things. I acknowledge that it can be exhausting, it can be uncomfortable, but one baby steps, one step at a time, and build up experience, and you'll get energy from an audience and positive feedback, and it comes with time. And I'll admittedly, it's not easy, and I say that personally, it wasn't easy for me as a graduate student to begin teaching and interacting with students. And it took me many years to really develop my leadership in the classroom and being better able to connect with students. In terms of leaders that you might want to read about and charismatic leadership, I often refer to Nelson Mandela, and not exclusively in my leadership classes, but I think we can learn a lot about leadership from Mandela, in particular charismatic leadership. And it just so happens that yesterday was 10 years since his passing. A book that came out earlier this year, The Plot to Save South Africa. I'm currently reading this, and it's about a critical moment in South Africa's transition from apartheid to a post-apartheid state, and it concerns a assassination of a political leader in the ANC. And Mandela's he's not in a formal leadership role at all in South Africa at that time, and he is able, through the power of his leadership, to steer the country away from a civil war. It was a powder keg at a time. So, this provides some really good insights. The Long Walk to Freedom, which is a memoir, is worth reading. A really great one to read if you're into sports is Playing the Enemy. And it talks about South Africa's, the Springboks, their 1995 World Cup rugby victory, and Mandela's role with the team. It's the movie Invictus. If anybody's heard of the movie Invictus, it's based on the book Playing the Enemy. It's a great read of charismatic leadership in general. So some things to think about. I think, Greg, you mentioned off the top, there's lots of leadership books out there, and so you can look around and ask people, who are you reading about, and it doesn't have to be anybody in your profession necessarily. I'm a big fan of reading widely, and I think we can gain lots of insights from leaders who are doing different things outside of our work. So just some thoughts there.
Okay, thank you. What are some key characteristics or behaviors that can help geospatial professionals identify potential leaders within their team or organizations? Are there specific qualities or actions that stand out when you encounter a natural leader? For recent graduates entering the job market, how can they assess whether a potential employer or supervisor embodies strong leadership qualities? Even down to their interview with them.
Yeah, let's start with that last one, because that's a tricky one, isn't it? And I think there are some generational differences as well in terms of expectations for leadership, and sort of the frequency and quality of feedback and leadership development opportunities. So first I'll say, I think in the context of being a new grad and on the job market, unless you've got multiple offers, you sometimes, you're just going to have to take what's offered, right? And that's, it's kind of very difficult to assess how that person's going to lead, unless you've heard, somebody who's already working on the team, and the manager, something about the manager through somebody else, and that's, but it's very tricky to do. And in most cases, you're not going to know. I mean, if you've got multiple offers, you could ask for, a follow-up conversation, just to get some clarity around different things. Obviously, ask in an appropriate way about, how the team is going. What can you expect in terms of, feedback? What's their, if it feels appropriate, what's kind of the leadership culture? That's one way to put it, without individualizing it on the supervisor. These types of things. But, what I would say is, if you find yourself in a situation where you have an offer, you accept, and it turns out you don't have that transformational leader, there may be withdrawn, or there may be overly directive, you got to work within those bounds, and, understanding leadership can be helpful in understanding your leader and what makes them tick. So you got to find out what's important to them, and, work within their, the bounds of their leadership, and the opportunities and limitations. And I would say, for anybody who's kind of in that role right now and going like, gosh, I don't have a really good relationship with my supervisor, manager, I don't have any easy answers for you, but in the North House book that I showed earlier, there's a chapter on what's called leader-member exchange theory. And have a read of that. It talks about, you know, in groups and out groups with leaders, and how you can, you know, tactics you might try to become closer to your leader and improve the relationship with the leader. To your first question, so key characteristics to identifying potential leaders in their teams and organizations. You know, I think that talked about a leadership culture in an organization, you know, and is the orientation towards like performance-based metrics, and like it's just kind of, I'll say, over the top, or is it more of a relational leadership culture or a collaborative leadership culture? It really depends on the culture of the organization, what they're looking for in leaders first and foremost. For me personally, and I look for people who have an orientation towards others rather than, you know, they follow their narrow self-interest, that are respected by their work colleagues. They're looked up to by their work colleagues. They have some influence. So, you know, I think when you're making, you know, promotion decisions in an organization, I think it's to leadership roles. I think it's important to go beyond, you know, basic performance outcomes and look at leadership skill and ability more broadly. But organizations do, you know, can fall into that trap of just looking at performance, and they may be great performers on their own, but, you know, deficient in leadership. And you're maybe not looking for the top performer, you're looking for the best leader, the person that can bring the team together and achieve high performance. And so I think that's important. But we also, Greg, I want to you know, acknowledge this. And again, we could talk for a long time about this, but I think it's really important is to acknowledge that there has been, for as long as organizations have existed, a tendency to select people for leadership roles that look, speak, think like us. And of course, that's just a form of bias. And it's led to an awful lot of discrimination in organizations where women are overlooked for leadership positions. And there's a lot of research on gender and leadership. One finding I always mention is that women across studies are actually found, in terms of transformational leadership, which is the most commonly studied approach to leadership, that women actually on average score higher than men. But when we look at mid to senior level, or who's in mid to senior level leadership positions in organizations, we don't see women always represented in the same ways that men are in those positions. And we could talk, if you're Black, Indigenous, the barriers that you also face. And this is right from the beginning in hiring process. If you're interested in research on bias in hiring processes, look at some of the studies where they take resumes and all they do, they send them into organizations, and all they're measuring is callbacks and sort of thing. And all they do with these resumes is they just manipulate the names. And so if there's no bias or discrimination, you know, all else equal, your name shouldn't really change anything, right? If there's no bias. And, you know, we find differences in callbacks, and these studies have been replicated. So, you know, I think that it's really important to also think about, in that context, is who is given leadership opportunities, who's given opportunities for going to do the executive MBA program, who gets more attention in terms of opportunities, stretch opportunities to lead a working group, and these sorts of things. So I think as a leader, and this is maybe something to think about if you're, you know, past that novice emergent stage, and you have your own business, for example, is to really think carefully about, have I got the best leaders in here? Because you might be surprised, like, given the chance, make it as open as possible and encourage people to take on these opportunities. Because again, we don't necessarily, the best leader may not be that like top performer necessarily in narrow performance goals. They may be the same person, but they may not be. I think I'll stop there. It's sort of going on a bit, but I think it's really important we think about that.
Perfect. I just got a follow-up random thought about, you mentioned the follow-up meeting, and I've actually done that. Unbeknownst to myself, I had a job interview where I was unsure, and then I asked for a follow-up meeting, and it really helped see the authentic side of the people, because they weren't in that scripted interview environment. And it was great. I ended up taking the job, but I was able to see them in a different light, where they weren't stuck to the script and they were just themselves, and it really helps. So.
And you can not only you're observing your potential future manager, but you're also observing how the team interacts too, if there's multiple people there, right? So you can pick up cues there. And thanks for sharing that, Greg.
Yeah, that's true. There was actually 3 of them there, and that's exactly what I observed. Was just a more laid back and joking kind of environment. It was really interesting. So if I'm reluctant to jump into leadership, what advice do you have for those like me who are hesitant or reluctant to take on leadership roles? And can you share some examples of successful leaders who initially hesitated to step into leadership positions and how they overcame their reluctance?
Yeah. So advice if you're hesitant or reluctant to take on. So this is about leadership roles. It's going from a frontline position, if I can call it that, or entry-level position, into a team lead or supervisor. We'll stick to the emergent leader piece there. So first thing I would say is that if you're working with people, and we still are, even though we've got AI and all these tools and software and all, we're still working together. It's incredible. And I think we're still going to be working with humans for a long time to come. So if you're working with people and you want to perform at a high level within your team, you have to hone your leadership skills. I'll just say that at the outset. Whether you have the leadership role or not, you've got to find a way to work with people that brings out their best and your best. And I think most people would agree with that. In terms of taking the next step to a leadership role, it's not uncommon that people are reluctant to do that. And some people, I'm just going to actually sit now. I've been standing for a bit. Some people have to be encouraged multiple times to take on that leadership role, and that's not an uncommon thing to hear. So I think if you're in that position of motivating someone from, say, a team lead to a manager role, encouraging and multiple times and developing them over time will give them, the confidence that they need to take that step forward to apply for that promotion. So, I don't think it's enough personally to say, well, there's the job the opportunities here, and one and done. I think it's important to encourage emergent leaders to take on these positions, and for the emergent leader to really think about what their mentor or coach is saying to them, and have, take that risk, to do that. And it will very likely work out very well, and you'll grow as a leader. You'll be making more decisions, and you'll have more influence in your organization. And you'll get that opportunity. And it's a fabulous opportunity to grow and contribute in different ways and to mentor other leaders in the organization, right? In your team. What a great opportunity to kind of give back. I've heard people say, I was reluctant to go to leadership role, but they do it because they didn't think there was anybody else that could take on the role. Sometimes maybe not altruistic motives. I didn't want that other person to get the job. I thought, they would be bad for the team. That may be a motivation. Or I was asked to do it. It's my time. Like everybody has to have a role, whether it's your professional society. It's my time to give back, sort of thing. So there's a whole bunch of motivations. In terms of I would say one other thing, I think the motivation can be kind of for multiple reasons, and that's fine. I'd say if your motivation is strictly power, I think you should do some self-reflection on kind of why you're getting into that role. I mean, there's still people out there who are just interested in power. And it kind of goes back to the point about, do I have another focus, another orientation, or is it about me? And so if it's about power for you, I think you got to think about that. And I'm not sure that that's going to necessarily lead for the best outcomes for your team and for your organization, if that's the motivation to get in there. I mean, I was talking with speaking with somebody a while ago. I can't remember exact context, but they joked, and people may have heard this joke before. Higher in the organization, the less power you have, in some ways. And I think there can be some truth to that as well, in some contexts. In terms of a leader, I'm thinking of somebody. This is a real life example, but I can't really share many examples. But they were actually somebody who I know well, who was taking on a leadership position in a university environment, and they were reluctant to do it. And I was surprised. I was actually surprised they were reluctant to do it. But they said, look, I've encouraged other people to take on leadership roles. And I think they just looked in the mirror and said, well, who am I if I don't, people are encouraging me, who am I if I don't take this on? And I think that was sort of the tipping point for them into moving into a leadership role. I mean, last thing I would say, Greg, on that is, look, if it doesn't go well for you, you can try it out and then maybe step back from it and say, look, this is not for me, or not at this time, or what have you. And that's okay too. I mean, we there seems to be a taboo about failing, but we all fail, sometimes epically. And we need to live with that and pick ourselves up and get up the next day and go forward. So give it a try. And there's lots of other leadership opportunities outside of your organization. I mentioned your profession. Youth sports teams, a great place to develop leadership skills as a coach, or as on a not-for-profit board in your community. There's countless opportunities to practice leadership with or without a role. So look at those and see what appeals to you. It's about making change at the end of the day, leadership, right? So that can be rewarding in itself.
That's interesting you mentioned that. We had an entrepreneurial speaker recently who said, use the same kind of examples for developing your entrepreneurial skills. So like community and sports and extracurricular activities. So that's good advice.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, even instrumentally approaching those opportunities, you are contributing to that organization or a campaign, whatever it is. If it's an advocacy campaign, you're giving to them, but you're also taking away. It's a win-win.
Yeah, I agree. So switching gears a little bit to sharpening our leadership skills. So how can participation in organizations like Toastmasters benefit ECPCs or ECPs in their leadership development journey? Are there specific communication or public speaking skills gained through those types of organizations that are particularly valuable for leaders? And can you share examples of leaders who navigated the challenges of leading remote or hybrid teams during the pandemic?
Okay, lots there. So Toastmasters, if you haven't heard of it, go to YouTube or go to their website and just look at what they do. They've got some short videos there. Toastmasters, there's chapters all over the world. Basic setup is there's a meeting set up, and people at the meeting have different roles, and the roles rotate across meetings, and so they have one person as a speaker talking about an issue or something. I'm not sure how they select what's being spoken about, but it's an opportunity to practice and hone your public speaking skills. And you know, I go back to my own experience, very nervous in elementary school. We've got teenagers, two of them, and I would just tell them the other day, like, I was terrified of public speaking growing up. I mean, my face would turn red. I would stop breathing. It was just, if I heard in September that there'd be public speaking in a course, I would be just upset about it and look for ways to get out of it. And, you know, I think for me, my own journey, everybody has their own kind of journey with leadership and public speaking. I think public speaking, being comfortable speaking to an audience is an important, very important leadership skill. And so, you know, it just takes a lot of practice for many of us. Some of us are a natural, just bam, you're on your feet. And I could see this teaching graduate classes, you know, there are just those who are just like, they are just flow into this and there's no problem. But for very many of us, you know, it does take practice. And I think Toastmasters or any similar venue that you can find for doing this, I think is very beneficial to you. And I think be patient with yourself, give yourself time to develop. You know, we see these wonderful TED Talks on YouTube, right? And people just seem like incredible. Well, you know, even for the natural speakers, they probably practice that about 20 times because they know they're being filmed and they're going on YouTube. So just think about that for a moment, right? I mean, think about who you're comparing yourself to and all the time and effort that went in to these things. So set up realistic expectation. I know it sounds hokey, but, you know, don't dwell on things that you know you need to develop. Dwell on your strengths. I know that seems really hokey, but positive self-talk is important. And the story we tell ourselves about who we are as a leader and our public speaking skills, I think, can influence how we do in these settings. So I think that's really important. Having a coach is valuable, and that can be, you know, somebody external to the organization that you meet with, and maybe there's some professional development funding available in your organization is something you want to look at kind of once you get into a leadership role. You may have to self-fund that, but I think that's worth trying. And if it works and it's valuable to you, do more of it. If it's not, then try something else. Within your organization, mentors, people who you look up to, who you trust, to give you honest feedback about your leadership, about handling of situations that arise, is valuable for learning. And that may not be, you know, somebody in your department. It might be somebody in your location, you know. So you might might think about who that is, take a moment right now to think about who would that be if I don't have a mentor right now, who could I go to that's experienced? And we've all benefited. I know I have from mentors, and so that's something else to kind of seek out, and just understand again that empirically leadership is, for most of us, it's learned, it's socialized, it's practiced, it's gained through experience, and it comes with time, and there will be setbacks along the way, and that's part of the rich journey of life, and we learn from those. Your last question, Greg, about the remote or hybrid teams. So I work mostly remote. So I'll be honest, I'm not up to date on the research there. I know there is research on effectiveness, and maybe others with experience can jump in. I think this is our last question, jump in with, share their experiences and advice here. I think it's challenging for people to be starting jobs where they're not meeting somebody in person, and can be a norm in some organizations. I think that's challenging. I think what I try to do is to very intentionally find time to meet in person with people just as soon as I can, and it takes more time. It does, because I can't just get up and go out of my office down the hall. It means I have to drive across town, or maybe I'm on a flight somewhere and I'm going to meet them when I'm there. I'm going to spend extra time, and maybe my trip's going to be a day longer. But you're investing in your relationship, and the quality of that relationship is critically important to the success and performance of your organization. And yes, you're working a hybrid or remote, but where you can invest in person in those relationships, it's just critical, I think, to developing things if you can, and check in with people. It's good to check in with people, even if it's not necessarily about work issues, and develop that relationship. Crisis emerges, and you need to lean on somebody and respond to something unexpected. Those strong relationships are going to be really helpful, and we'll leverage those. And so that investment that you've made will pay off in spades down the road, I believe. And Greg, that's kind of, those are some thoughts there. I hope what I've shared, and a lot of it's from the research, but some on personal experience. Hope that's helpful, people. And I wish you the very best with your own leadership journey. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. Yeah, the research side of it is something that I don't think we even as our careers progress, we probably wouldn't be exposed to that all the time through various leadership training. They always try and put a spin on it, saying that it is based on research and stuff like that, but it's good to see somebody on the front lines there, and with a lot of experience in the leadership realm, and to hear your candid story about sounds a lot like me being terrified when you find out that you have an upcoming speaking experience. I'm still in that one, but I'm working on it. So I typed in the chat, does anybody have any questions they want to ask live? I know Youssef usually has one or two that he's got there. I do have one. I think it's been sitting in this document. Can you compare and contrast or relate technical skills for leadership? Like, do you need to be, I guess, how does that balance? Most of us are technical. Do we need to be technical for leadership, or,
Yeah, that's a good question. So every profession kind of in their, I don't want to say this now, accreditation or competency documents will list leadership competencies. And I was looking at one, I teach at UBC and in the program for occupational hygienists, and very technical. But you'll see in the professional competencies, the leadership side of things. You're working with people, right? You work with clients, working with other people on the team. You might be working with regulator, for example. So you need to have these leadership skills. And I would say, I'll make a generalized statement, and some may quibble with it, but I think, you know, the technical skills will only take you so far in terms of advancing in the organization. I think, you know, sooner or later, you got to invest in developing your leadership and relational skills to really, you know, have the greatest impact that you can. And it's a general statement, yeah.
I like it. I think it makes a lot of sense. So
Thank you,
I guess
Sean.
You're welcome, Youssef.
questions or thoughts you want to add?
Yeah, I have a question. Also, other participants, if you want to unmute yourself, ask any question, you're more than welcome. If you're okay with your being added to the recording, it's fine. So, Mike, first, I want to thank you for this enlightening presentation, and really the stories that you told us and shared with us made it more like we can relate to. My favorite part is that the leadership, the role of genetics that you said, it's 50% life experience roughly and 50% genetics. So it's a combination of both. And my favorite like thing is that you said that the training opportunity that sports team, board of directors, and how it helped to shape. And this is an opportunity to tell everybody, once you get involved into leadership position like ECPC, because you are volunteer, you can make mistakes. You're not getting paid. So this is where you come and learn, and there is no, you don't feel bad if you make any mistake. You are here to learn, and everybody knows that you are providing your time. And one thing I want to say is the orientation. When you mentioned about the orientation, I think this is where you can tell the orientation and the authenticity. Is the orientation is self-oriented or it's more towards impacting others? I think. But my question will be, do you believe that when I enter to an interview or I meet a person, there is a feeling in my heart that tells me if a person is genuine or not? Is that, can I rely on that feeling, or it's not always?
Yeah, I mean, that's going.
Like you meet people and then you have a feeling that this guy is really like, the way he talks, the way he responds to your question, and you're the, let's say, somebody like for them, they are high, because we meet a lot of people that are very influential in the conferences. The way they respond, it will give you a certain feeling that this guy, oh my God, I'm just a normal attendee and now he's giving me all his time and attention.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very powerful. I mean, first impressions can be powerful, but it really depends on how the relationship develops
Okay.
after that, and whether people are sincere or they're disingenuous. So I mean, there's lots of psychological research on this, and the different biases sometimes we bring to people as well, and how we might read somebody who's maybe not as outgoing, and they may just be shy, and we miss out on an opportunity to like get a relationship, but we think so. It's tricky, right? I mean,
I see what you're saying.
but never underestimate the power of that attention to somebody as a leader, right? You're in a faculty role, right? And taking time with a student, for example. I mean, or a former graduate student that comes back for advice. I mean, that can mean a lot to that student, and your interest in where they're at with their life and everything like that. These things mean so much. to people, right? And so I think it transfers to any job you're in, right? Showing a genuine interest in somebody and in the person.
Thank you.
All right, so if anybody wants to reach out and get in touch with you, what's the best way to do so?
I can put my, or Greg, would you mind just putting my email in the chat? That's fine.
It could be a little dangerous when it gets on YouTube.
Oh, I see. So yeah, you can just look me up, Google Sean Tucker, and my U of R University of Regina email address is publicly accessible there. So
We apologize in advance if you get spammed after this. Thank you very much for your contribution. It's greatly appreciated, and we're so happy that you were able to do this. And
pleasure. Best wishes, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.